This episode of GenreVision is brought to you by our premium subscribers at patreon.com/GenreVision. For $5 a month, our premium subscribers get access to an ever-growing library of exclusive bonus content, including weekly pre-show recordings, peeks behind the scenes, and a big currently consuming session every month. Sign up at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we close out 2020 with I think, a nice surprising present, Wonder Woman 1984. Before we do that, we do get to do a call to action this week, one of our favorite calls to actions, I should say, and that is that we have a new review on the Apple Podcast Store. This comes to us from user PN Gwyn, which I commend your username because it seems to be a reference to the 1966 Batman film. PN Gwyn left, this has to be our longest review, right? Like this. Oh, yeah. It is so incredible. I got to read this on Christmas, so it was an amazing Christmas present. They gave us 5 stars, and the title for the review was like an oil change for your ears, which I will take that because, you know, it's always nice to get your oil changed. This review is so glowing, and I wish I could feature the whole thing, but I do want to say one of my favorite parts about it is that they said, I recommend the show to my fellow movie buffs I know, and they seem to love the show as well. And honestly, this is a good chance for us to remind people, if you like the show and you think there's anybody who might also like the show, word of mouth is the best marketing possible.
Yeah, I mean, online in the Apple Podcast realm, the reviews are that, but like outside in meat space, in the real world, telling people really works. And you'd be surprised how like hesitant people are to actually talk about what they love. But you know what? I'm loud and I'm proud about GenreVision. And I'm glad you are too, PN Gwyn.
Thank you so much. I genuinely mean it was a wonderful Christmas present to read that review. I wish I could read the whole thing. So thank you. And thank you to anyone who does leave a review on the Apple Podcast Store. We will definitely make sure to highlight it here on the show. So Wonder Woman 1984, which we watched in the comfort of our homes, thanks to HBO Max, which we're very thankful for.
And thanks to Warner Brothers. I mean, you know, just right off the bat, I knew just a couple minutes in that I was going to have, in one regard, like a hard time not keeping in mind like just how much of a delight it was to watch this in the comfort of my own home. Mm-hmm. It really did feel like, you know, I was overwhelmed in the first couple minutes of the movie, not just because the first couple minutes of the movie are quite good, but like, I don't know, it felt like I was doing something normal, that things were back on track and that like wheels were moving again in my world.
Yeah.
It was a nice feeling. It has nothing to do with the movie. It only has to do with the delivery system.
Sure.
Which is fantastic. I watched this in 4K, Dolby Vision HDR, a good home video sound mix. It was everything I want in a good home video presentation. So many thanks to Warner Brothers and HBO Max for making that happen. That aspect of this experience was really lovely. Agreed.
And Wonder Woman 1984, this has been a movie that Travis and I have been kind of wary about because it was announced in production so long ago, and obviously it underwent a bunch of delays because of the pandemic. But even before that, it seemed to be undergoing delays, and it was like, is something up with the movie?
Yeah, it seems to be in the can for a long time. And then there was some big reshuffling that happened. Like Aquaman came out. It was very different than the prior DCEU movies, and it was a big success.
Huge success.
Yeah. Also, there was some executive reshuffling as well. They were sort of reorganizing the DC folks to be, I think, the same folks that managed WB's horror division. So it was a lot of like the same folks who, you know, want to make the Conjuring movies, and like WB in the last couple of years turned into basically a big budget R-rated horror factory that, you know, learned how to make money and do it well. They learned which audiences they wanted to cater to. They learned exactly what sells and, you know, which filmmakers to work with to make this an easy process. And they did the same thing with their DC division. And Wonder Woman 84 was kind of caught up in that. It was also a pretty strong creative endeavor from Patty Jenkins, because not only does she direct the film, she also has a story by credit along with Jeff Johns, and then a screenplay by credit with Jeff Johns and one other writer. I forget who. But it's clear that this is a Patty Jenkins film from the opening moments, because that's the credit they give her. A Patty Jenkins film.
Oh yeah, they're making no qualms about that. And obviously, since this is a new release, we will stay spoiler free, and we will let you know when we're going to get into spoilers as far as the plot goes. Overall, I wrote a review for this, and you can go find it if you want to read kind of my big take. But I was extremely delighted with this movie from the very opening sequences, and we won't get into too many particulars, but this, I think it is fair to call Wonder Woman 1984 a throwback superhero movie in a lot of ways, and I think that's one of its absolute best elements.
Sure, there's a lot about it on paper that reminded me of the Donner Superman movies.
Oh, sure.
Where there were just sort of like broad screwball comedies in a lot of ways that, you know, played fast and loose with what people loved about the comics, because that was the medium they were playing in. And, you know, I like the Richard Donner Superman quite a bit, as, you know, not only as a film in its own right, but also a relic of its time. I think it features a really brilliant performance from Christopher Reeve. And then, of course, it embraces its science fiction elements in a way that I find really pleasing, you know, with big sets and effects photography, and the weight of Marlon Brando being there, even though he kind of didn't want to be. The big glowy suits and all that kind of stuff. You know, it embraces a kind of silliness inherent in these older pulp characters.
These were big, colorful, silly characters, not just visually, but emotionally.
Right.
That was
for
part
young
of
audiences. Like Patrick H. Willems did a video recently that actually had to remind people that when these DC characters first came around, these were targeted at really young kids, like 8-year-olds.
Sure, and that's not to say that there isn't a plethora of really interesting commentary material or mythos building in those early comics. And Wonder Woman in particular, as a comic, is very fascinating as far as its origins and stuff. But people seem to really like feeling like, hey, these are superheroes that feel like they take place in a world that's just left of ours, like just a little off. And so they feel much more, and I'm not really a big fan of this term, but it's the one that gets thrown around a lot. The term is grounded.
Sure.
And the superhero movies that I find myself really gravitating to, and that this tracks with Wonder Woman 84 as well, even more so than I think the first Wonder Woman, are movies that really embrace the bigness of superheroes and their boldness. And again, that is visual, and I think this movie embraces that, and I think setting it in the 1980s gives it an out for a lot of audience, because they will there's just been this reappraisal of the 80s as a very, you know, vibrant, gaudy decade, which is not to say it wasn't, but in film and television and stuff that we've seen in recent years with the 80s, everything is just, you know, it's like anything. It is a fantasized version of the decade.
Sure, it's fictionalized. You know, the rose-colored glasses are on fully, and that is happening in Wonder Woman 84. So the film offers a brief flashback to Diana's youth, where she's competing in sort of like I don't know, Amazonian games. It's like American Ninja Warrior for young Amazons. And there is a brief moral lesson delivered by Robin Wright's character. She comes back for that scene. Connie Nielsen shows up for that scene as well. And this brings about some of the kind of fantasy design that we saw in Aquaman. There is an arena. You know, we all know the Aquaman movie loved arenas and those kinds of big, austere fantasy spaces with very bold shapes. It also feels really big and open, and in a movie like this, that can tend a little bit towards void space. You know, wide open beaches with really nothing on them, or like wide open grasslands with not a whole lot on them. Luckily, they did some good location shooting that really helps keep this looking like a place and not just a set for people to run on.
Well, and Jenkins is a good director. I think I think she's actually a little bit freer in this sequel, because the original Wonder Woman still had to adhere to a very particular color palette and kind of cinematic language because it was still in that mold that had been established by Zack Snyder, who it should say is a producer on Wonder Woman 84.
Yeah.
What I really liked about Wonder Woman 84 is, in a way, this kind of felt like the first Wonder Woman movie to me, because it's the first one that steps out of that look and feel. It doesn't feel, its personality doesn't feel attached to those kind of things that it was carrying over from the Zack Snyder interpretations. This really, and like we said, feels like Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman.
Right. It does not feel a whole lot like anything else in the rest of the DCEU. And that fact alone, I think, is a good thing. You know, whether or not it's able to achieve what it sets out to do is another thing entirely, but I was pleased to see that this does not follow too heavily in the footsteps of other DCEU movies tonally, and plot-wise. It seems to be very, you know, doing very much its own thing. It does recall the sort of broad simplicity of characters from, like I said, those Donner Superman movies, where characters, you know, especially villains, have very simple, big motivations that will be easily understandable by young viewers. And these, again, are all things that I kind of like about the film on paper. Like, after we get to 1984, we see what Diana is doing, and there is a wonderful action sequence in a shopping mall. It looks just like the shopping mall that they built for Stranger Things season 3. You know, it's that same nostalgia bait stuff. Well, Diana's doing incredible stuff. You know,
it's so a montage of her saving, because she saves somebody from getting run over by a car by kicking it. Here's the thing: this kind of movie, I've seen descriptions of it being corny and cheesy, and all of those things to me are pluses about the movie.
Yeah, I don't think that they are negatives. They're not necessarily benefits. They're just part of the fabric of what the story is. It's different. You know, I think the addition of that corniness and cheese factor is a different flavor, and I welcome the inclusion of those different flavors. Again, those to me aren't inherently negative things. It's all about how the movie uses those flavors that you know ultimately makes a critical assessment.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to it because we know each other's feelings about the movie before we talk about it. But
you know, suffice to say, like, I was really on board in the first, say, 15 minutes of the movie. You know, where we have the flashback sequence, which is in the IMAX aspect ratio. You know, big impressive CGI stuff. I think the kid that they got to play young Diana did a good job. And then Wonder Woman in the mall in DC in 84, like that whole introductory part is really great. And you had made some comparisons in your review to Raimi's Spider-Man films. And I thought, yeah, Drew was right in the money with this. I mean, this is like classic Raimi style, open-hearted heroes swinging around, connecting with the citizens of their city and, you know, smiling at kids and the kids smiling back. I'm like, yeah, this is all really nice. I liked it a lot, and it was a good action sequence where the stakes were simple and understandable, and you know, it wasn't trying to push edgy excitement as the primary goal of that sequence. It was quite a nice thing to watch.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've kind of become conditioned to again with superhero cinema, is that it's supposed to be about how badass is the hero. Mm-hmm. And this isn't a movie that's really interested in badassery. If anything, it's kind of commenting against it and saying that using these abilities to be a badass is not the right way.
Yeah, it's an anti-cool movie.
Yeah, which is cool.
I mean, Diana has, you know, there are some sequences early on between Diana and Kristen Wiig's character, Barbara, who is a colleague of hers, where they kind of recognize each other's, like, you know, the things they like about one another's style. You know, they compliment one another, and it's, you know, it's very genuinely fun to see these characters just like sit and, you know, have a glass of wine together and just shoot the shit. You know, that was nice to see. And I like that the movie's substance isn't really the stuff that modern superhero movies are made of. It's different. It's a little bit more relaxed and settled into itself in a way that I found was like, okay, it's found its groove. It's a little more comfortable. It's a little bit more laid back.
Well, I think, again, there's been this common criticism that I really want to combat, that everybody's like, the Wonder Woman 1984 doesn't have enough action. There's not enough action in the movie. And that was such a bonus to me, because instead of having an action beat every 20 minutes, that first hour or so is really about spending time with the characters and really getting into the characters' heads, finding out their motivations, their desires, and the conflicts that they're feeling. And yeah, that is at the sacrifice of, oh, look, she punched somebody. Oh no, it's been 20 minutes. She better punch somebody again. And it's like, I found that so refreshing. And I also think that the movie was doing that stuff really well.
Yeah, I think for the most part, and I think all the setup of the characters makes a lot of sense. I think the one with the weakest setup is our villain, which is Max Lord, played by Pedro Pascal. Pascal plays him really big and fun, and this movie is trying for big and fun and colorful. Those are its big things.
Well, it should be said we're not introduced to him in person first. We see him right after the title sequence as a character on a commercial where he gives his little motto of like, life is good, but it could be better. And he's selling people on this idea, this black gold cooperative oil company that you can be a part of. And he says all these lines about stuff like, it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to have a business degree. You don't have to work hard. You just have to want it.
Yeah, it's immediately an interesting commentary, and it really makes use of the backdrop of 1984 and presenting the 80s as this, or at least the time period it chose and the place it chose, presenting it as a period of prosperity.
I mean, not just prosperity, of excess, where excess was sold as a virtue, as something to strive for.
We get our first inklings of plot. Like, I would consider these to be very, very minor spoilers. If somebody were to tell me these things, I wouldn't be angry about them. But like, the major plot points in the first act of the film concern a magical stone. There are characters that, because of their jobs in archaeology, come in possession of the stone. Maxwell Lord, or is it Maximilian Lord? Max Lord,
Maxwell.
whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, Maxwell Lord.
Well, his name's not even really Max Lord.
Yeah, it's Pedro Pascal. Pedro Pascal's character is aware of this stone as a thing and is seeking it. And so he comes looking for it, and this is what allows him to cross paths with Diana and Barbara.
Yeah, that all sounds spoiler-free to me. I mean, this is, we normally go beat for beat with plot stuff here, but the big stuff I want to say is that direction-wise, I really think Jenkins directs the hell out of this movie. I think it's a really good-looking movie. Mm-hmm. It gets big and bombastic as the story goes on and when we get into the third act. But for the most part, I really like the intimacy of her direction. There's a great shot of Diana and another character dancing near the big the pond in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Near the Washington Monument. Yeah. I think for the most part, Jenkins does a really great job with staging and blocking scenes. There are a couple of scenes later on that I felt were staged and blocked incorrectly for the emotional beats they were, and it was part of one of the reasons that I felt an eventual downturn in my assessment of the movie. Like we're offering up spoiler-free generalized assessments here. Drew, you've made your opinion well known that you had a great time with this movie. You gave it a 5-star review at giantfreakandrobot.com. And let's acknowledge the pattern here. Like, there have been many times where we've reviewed these DC movies where you're really positive on them at the outset, and then over time you eventually kind of relax on them a little bit.
I still like Suicide Squad, but anyways, so no, here's the thing. Let me. This has nothing to do with the movie. I just want to talk about 5-star idea. When you write movie reviews and you are subjected to making a rating assessment, I put no genuine value in ratings. I think they're stupid metrics that mean nothing.
Why do you rate stuff on Letterboxd then?
Yeah, because I could just log things, but people like ratings, and I gave myself the obstruction of I don't give any half stars. So I have all these things where it's like, oh, it's 3, like you gave this movie 3 stars and this movie 3 stars, and it's funny. So I can, say things like, yeah, I feel the same way about Godmothered as I did about Mank, because I gave them both 3 stars. So
they're the same movie practically.
But I think those kind of ratings are so much more emotionally based than a review is, because with a review you get to mete out your take. Mm-hmm. And my big, with a review, I believe that you don't need to. That's what I like doing about the show, is that we can get into little pieces, because I do have criticisms of this movie, even ones I've not addressed with you yet, which we'll get into. But for these kind of reviews, you have to give a take. And my big take away from Wonder Woman 84 was it filled me with light. Like I was like, I feel wonderful. I'm on this movie's wavelength, and the emotion that it's going for, it really affected me, like to the point where I was tearing up multiple times during the movie.
I mean, I teared up during the opening few minutes of the movie, during the flashback sequence, and then also in the mall sequence at the beginning. It just, for one, I think I was overwhelmed with how nice it felt to be watching this at home finally.
Yeah,
it just felt like
it
felt like a really nice thing. You just a really nice gift, and an experience that I was really enjoying and felt more like normal than a lot of things have this year. So I think I was overwhelmed by that. But also, like, the movie was just fucking working. It was really working.
I think for you, it was more about the function of the movie delivering something very particular to you that hit that spot. Whereas with me, it was purely the emotion. Because the two parts that I really teared up with are two of the big emotional beats of the movie.
Okay.
And so I think we were just clicking on different elements of the movie in general. And that, I think, will eventually come around to our where we separate in our opinions. But before we get into specifics of the plot and stuff, as far as generalizations go, I don't know if there's anybody you want to highlight as far as acting wise. I think Kristen Wiig is really good in this movie. Like,
yeah,
secretly good.
She doesn't mug in the kind of way that a lot of SNL or ex-SNL actors will. I think she inhabits this role very comfortably, and there are some beats where she has to turn on a little bit more of a sinister edge, and I think she does shockingly well with that. And because this is a comic book superhero movie, characters often will blatantly state their intentions in their dialogue, and I find that to be normal. That's fine. And there's a scene later on in the movie where she's in a helicopter with another character, and she has this sort of sinister turn, and I was like, you know what? Wig's kind of kicking this role's ass. Like, this is pretty good. And as much as I like Gal Gadot in the role of Wonder Woman, I feel like she wasn't quite prepared as a performer for the way that this movie would change the depiction of the character, because she had to be this sort of glowering, like, tough Amazonian badass in Batman versus Superman and Wonder Woman and Justice League. She was, a bit more of a somber edge to her characterization. And in this one, she's a little bit more sort of fun-loving and open and having sort of goofy moments.
I think that was there in the first one.
Yeah, there was some fish out of water stuff with her in the first one that worked pretty well. But here, there are a few big emotional beats that I feel like Gadot did not deliver. And, I don't have a whole lot against her, but I just feel like the material and her weren't matching up correctly in a few big moments, important moments.
I won't totally disagree with you there. I do want to say I think Pedro Pascal is awesome in this. I think he has to play a character at 10 through the whole movie.
All the time.
And that's really, I mean, I can see that becoming grating for people. So if they have that complaint, I understand. But I actually found it really, really good for like, as far as his interpretation of it. He's asked to play a classic big comic book villain, but not in the, he's not quite mustache twirling until I would say the very end of the movie.
Well, I thought he would go more arch with his performance. It really isn't all that arch a villainous performance, because I don't think the character is evil.
No, he's pathetic.
He undergoes something in the movie that kind of whacks him out. And I don't know how much control or agency he has throughout a lot of this thing. And this is a big problem with that I have with this villain. It's like I wasn't quite sure who or what was in control or who was in the driver's seat for his performance a lot of the time, because he starts so big and crazy. And I thought, well, is his ambition going to carry him to this point? Well, it's like, well, there are subtle signs. No, there are not very unsubtle signs that he's kind of going off the rails. But I'm like, is this him or is this supernatural force that's acting upon him?
I think, without getting into spoilers, I think this is completely him, because his character, as introduced for the first time we see him, is a lie. Like, he is a lie. Everything about him is a lie. And so I can understand there being a disconnect with a character who, from everything we've seen, there seems to be nothing genuine about him.
Right. They don't actually reveal that there's much of a human core to him until the climax of the film.
There's a couple moments. It's cheap. I won't lie that the device that they use to do that is cheap, but it's not like, I don't think it's a deal breaker. And also I actually don't think it's bad. I think it's utilized like, okay, but it goes big. Like by the end of it, they use that element in a grandiose way.
Well, his character has a son. I don't think that's a huge spoiler to say. Like, his character has a young son. He's a single dad. And I forget that the son has a really unique name, but I forget exactly what it is. Alistair, that's right. But I just remember like hugging Alistair more tightly than anything else, like squeezing Alistair to the point where Alistair was like, you need to stop. And I was like, that can't be comfortable for that actor. Yeah, it's just such an extreme performance from Pascal. And I think in a lot of ways that's enjoyable to see because Pascal's fun to watch. I like him. And it's certainly a really big departure from what we've seen from his, rare bits of screen time where his face is exposed in The Mandalorian.
I think even in Game of Thrones, he never got to go like this really vivid. Like he's a vivid character.
Larger than life, baby.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing is that he is it's weird because this is a character who is constantly playing a character throughout the story.
Mm-hmm.
The very few peaks we get at him on his own, which are usually just him and his son, is like, oh yeah, this guy is just like a total wimp.
Yeah, he's this odd blend of like Tony Robbins, like a motivational speaker and an evangelical priest and a ruthless capitalist. Like there's
Gordon
definitely
Gekko.
Yeah, it's kind of a Gordon Gekko character, but when we first meet him,
there's another person that he's very clearly model off of.
Yeah, well, when we first meet him, it's very apparent that he doesn't have a whole lot of money, that he's a charlatan and is putting on a front, and he's spent what money he's had on these TV ads for his oil cooperative. It's such a strange idea. And he wants investors to buy into this, and he's got investors that he's borrowed a bunch of money from who are trying to shake him down. And this is why he is seeking this magical stone, is because he thinks like this is what's going to make me a success. And that's a runaway train effect. Like as soon as he gets the stone, he's clearly thought about like what he's going to do with it and made a plan. The trouble is, like, once that happens in the plot then opens up to so many crazy possibilities that the movie kind of falls into chaos because there's not one, specific scheme that he's going for. Like his end game in the movie is, as it is in the start, is like, I just want to be a financial success and get more and more and more money. But that whole idea of like getting more and more goes off the rails really quick as he goes crazy because it's clear that his power is hurting him.
Well, and it's also it's a matter of, it's simple to, because so early on and throughout he continually says like, what else is there to want but more? Like you can never be it. He eventually becomes the personification of greed.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in the first Wonder Woman movie, we were dealing with the personification of war. Like it's these very male driven kind of urges that have put the world into horrible situations, war and greed.
Right. All this was personified by Ares. And in this one, like, this is not an apolitical film. I actually feel in a lot of ways it's political. This is more political than Wonder Woman.
It's undeniable that it's political when in that mall sequence, Wonder Woman grabs the robbers' guns and crushes them and like basically looks directly into the camera and says, I hate guns. And here, let me tell you, I loved that moment. Like it was so great. And to make that kind of statement with a character like that, it's powerful. And I'm sure it's going to, piss off the people who are already going to be pissed off about this movie for whatever agendas they have.
Sure. But it's all about, the idea of, what do we want? And, what are our wants determined by? Like, who tells us what we get to want and what is okay to want? And they're big ideas, and the movie attempts to dissect them. But the more I think it attempts to dissect them, the clumsier it gets at it. There is a point eventually in the movie where our opinions diverge really greatly. I won't spoil exactly what happens, but it's as the second act of the film comes to a close and transitions into the third act where our heroine experiences her low point.
Yeah, it seems very clear that the third act of the movie is when Travis and I just went totally different ways.
Yeah. Well, it's more that transition point from the second into the third act that really turned me off. There is a sequence with some emotional beats that are crucial to not only advancing the plot, but also advancing Diana as a character. And it was so much bullshit to me, the way that they did this. I couldn't stand the way that they did it. It was like, it felt all wrong. It felt like the big silliness and like the sort of anything goes goofy attitude that I think did the movie really well in the first hour and a half. Suddenly the movie didn't know how to use that energy because it had to reckon with the plot getting fairly dark. Because now the plot became an apocalyptic scenario because of course it's a big superhero movie and the world is at risk. And I felt like it didn't know how to deal with that transition.
I think this is also a structural issue. And I think like we're clear that we're going to get diverse, so I think we need to get into spoilers and be able to talk about the specifics here.
Yeah.
And you know, when we get to the end, we'll kind of sum up, and I think this will explain things better.
So spoilers from this point on?
Spoilers from this point on. I mean, we can get into just specifics because there were still things that I think you were liking. Like we haven't talked about Steve Trevor, who in the movie, this magical stone that will grant any one wish for you, and they outright have to say this is the monkey's paw. Which, you know, if you know what the monkey's paw is, immediately you know it. But Steve Trevor still has to explain to people this is what the monkey's paw is, and that's fine. All of this I don't have a problem with. The idea is that Max Lord takes the stone and he says, my wish for the stone is I want to be you. I want to be the stone. I want to be the thing that will grant people's wishes because I can dictate what the negative outcome of their wish will be, and I will make it a positive for me. And it's like, okay, that's really weird and interesting.
It is. Yeah. It reminded me a bit of that X-Files episode where Mulder finds the Janaya.
Don't remember that one.
And there are all these unintended consequences to all his wishes.
Don't remember that one.
She's rolled up in a carpet. You don't remember that episode? Anyway.
Nope.
Sorry. If somebody remembers that episode of the X-Files, please let us know in the comment section at GenreVision.com.
Oh, I'm sure people do. People love that. But I mean, it's a classic be careful what you wish for thing that's been done in a million stories. But the idea of making the object of the wishes a person who can then dictate the trade that he's going to make, because he eventually explains this straight out to Kristen Wiig's character, Barbara, who he says, like, look, I realized, like, instead of getting one wish, I'll be the thing that grants the wishes. So, for example, he eventually goes to see the president of the United States, who I love as a
President.
I love that he's a fictional president. If it would have been somebody in Reagan makeup, it would have been awful. And I love that it establishes that, hey, this is not our world. It's a fictional world. Mm-hmm. He gets the president to grant his wish, but in return, he says, I'm going to take all of your power, all of your influence, all of your authority, all of this. And so immediately everybody magically around the world is just like, well, okay, like we'll obey you because you're the president.
Yeah. Well, and he's got magical silly powers. Like this is when the movie went way off the rails for me in terms of plot, because he wants to take over the world. Why?
Does he? I don't think
know, because he's yelling and on about the world. I want the world or whatever. I couldn't care.
Well, the thing is that metaphorically, what they're trying to do, like deal with the character, is that greed has no ending. Like you'll never be satisfied. That greed only leads to more greed. So even if you think you've achieved the pinnacle of what you've gotten, you're not going to feel satisfied. You're always going to want more. And that's also tied in with the lore behind the stone, where it's specifically that the stone was made by a god of lies, of deception.
Yeah.
So that the idea is that, hey, this greed and this magic that you're going to get, it's a sham, it's a scam, it's a con. And very specifically early on, somebody calls Max Lord a con man, and that's the first time, like, he angrily says, like, I am not a con man.
Right. Well, and it's in front of his son too, and
right.
For some reason his son cries when his dad is called a con man. I have no idea. The son is so strange. They use that character as such a weird pawn in the story. Poor Bingo. For whatever reason, I just want to call him Bingo.
Okay, Milmo.
We see Alistair cry in front of Pedro Pascal's character after one business associate calls him a con man. And of course, he has to, Pedro Pascal has to hug young Bingo and say, "Your daddy loves you very much." And then there's a scene later on where he's at the sort of, rise of his power, where the Black Gold cooperative offices are like bustling, and his personal assistant comes to his door. He's like, "Your son is here." And he's like, "Oh, all these weekends with my son, I can't take much." And then you see the little shadow of Alistair behind the frosted glass door run away. And he's like, "I fucked up." I would have thought this character's motivation.
Why does Pedro Pascal sound like one of the old Muppet men? Like, he's just like,
Alistair, I only want more.
But
so I would have thought that this character's motivations and wants would be more specifically tied to his son. Instead, the movie kind of takes the son hostage in a weird way, as this bargaining chip for him in the end that he remembers. Bingo. Poor Bingo back on the mainland. Bingo can't see the nukes fall.
His name is Alistair, for God's sake.
I know.
You're trying to you're creating Bingo to strengthen your argument. I get it, but I mean, the whole thing is that because there's one of my favorite scenes as far as that plot, because like I say, using the son is cheap. I acknowledge that, but it's cheap like a lot of comic book like stories have been in the past, and it's okay because I like the scene in which he finally gets a private moment with his son. This is after he has the Dreamstone powers. And he says, like, "Look, when I'm successful, you'll see that it'll all make sense and that, like, I did this all and everything." And the son, it should also be said, it's very specific that to grant the wish, somebody has to be touching Maxwell Lord. And so his son's touching me and he says, like, "Then I wish for your success. I wish for your greatness, Dad." And it's like...
and the little Neil Breen fart blows through his hair.
Okay. Anyways,
they use the winds of change as a visual indicator of a wish being granted,
which is corny. I acknowledge the corniness of it, but again, it's just not negative to me.
No, it's not negative to me either. It actually serves as a very good indicator of something happening. A visual indicator. Is it broad? Yes, but that way means it's understandable by the 8-year-olds in the audience, and that's fine. That's fine. These superhero movies are for kids. That's okay. In
a movie with someone who dresses in that ridiculous armor being broad, I can't believe it. Like, I know you're agreeing. So here's the thing. The movie eventually gets around to making a big thematic, because I mean, we haven't even talked about Steve Trevor and because the first wish that's granted is Diana's, and we don't even know what she's wished for, but we know what she's wished for.
We know.
Yeah. Because when she's introduced after saving people at the mall, and we get to hear the news report, like, who was this woman? Like, what, who is she? Let's show her empty apartment with all of her pictures. We get a sense that, we see her dining alone, like a waiter has to come out and be like, "Are you waiting for someone?" It's like, "Nope, it's just me alone. I'm always alone. I am alone, alone, alone." And it's like, yes, okay. But again, like you're saying,
there's some really funny photoshopped photos on her shelves.
Yeah.
There's one where it's like she's standing in front of a sign. It's obviously Gal Gadot's head pasted on somebody in a flannel shirt, like out in Montana or whatever. And it just says, the sign behind her says, "Trevor Ranch." And I'm like, that's goofy as shit, man. But it got the point across.
Well, and she's got the indicator that links back to Steve. She has his watch, which he gave her at the end of the previous movie. And when she grants the wish, we cut back into her apartment and we see the watch, and the winds of change blow and it moves a little bit and it starts ticking again. Mm-hmm. And the way they bring Steve Trevor back, which, okay, I guess they could have just brought him back in as a body, nobody cared, but his body was, explodified. Instead, he seems to be possessing another man.
It's strange. I don't know why they do this, because later on in the film, Maxwell Lord seems to be able to grant powers to people magically, just poof, whatever, you can turn into a leopard now. So I don't know why they had this moment where there's this dude that kind of looks like a mix between Chris Pine and Billy Crudup, and also Lucas Haas. They were put in the fucking Brundlefly machine.
I don't see Lucas Haas at all, but okay.
Billy Crudup, though, am I right?
Yeah, no, I see Billy Crudup. I get that.
Okay, so I'm looking at a picture of the guy right now, and that I sent to you in our Discord chat, and I'm like, oh yeah, I see Lucas Haas in the profile. But this guy shows up to a party that Diana is at. And I was loving this party scene. It was really fun. I was loving the stuff that was going on between Barbara and Maxwell. And this dude shows up and he starts saying some of Steve Trevor's lines. And I was like, fuck is this? Who's this guy? Who's this fake Steve Trevor?
More particularly, he is dubbed with Chris Pine's voice.
Yes. So I have no idea why they did this. It's such a strange choice. Like, because in that moment where she embraces him, like the camera swirls around, and then when it finally comes back around the other side, it's Chris Pine standing there. And I thought, why? Why does he look like Chris Pine to everybody else in that moment, or just to her?
No. They go back to his apartment, and we have the scene where it's like, okay, he's got to look in the mirror and see that it's Guy, and she directly point blank states like, all I see is you. Like, it's like, okay, fine. Like that's movie magic Magumbo stuff like that.
Right.
I buy it. But my issue, because I do have issues with this movie, even though I gave it a 5-star, which means it's perfect and flawless and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not what those mean. My issue is that the movie, it's a really weird, strange decision. But one, I was like, okay, well, then there's going to be a conflict of like, hey, who is this guy? Like, I'm possessing another man so you can have your wish to you basically killed someone. Like, to get me back.
What happened to this poor guy's life in the meanwhile? Nothing. He seems to be okay in the end, though, so good for him. But
yes,
yeah, I still don't know why they did this, because like when Steve Trevor is around as Steve Trevor, he's just Steve Trevor, and he doesn't really seem to have lost a step. He's there. He's Chris Pine, so of course he looks great, and he's extraordinarily charismatic. He doesn't get quite as much to do this time around. That's okay. He gets a little bit of product placement and nostalgia bait when he's eating Pop-Tarts in bed, which I found, of course, very endearing. And of course, the stupid animal brain in me went, you got to get some Pop-Tarts right now, bro.
Sure. Well, I mean, they give him his dress up montage, which is funny. I liked that.
It felt like Chris Pine was, spouting off some improv lines.
Yep. Yeah, it feels like bad improv, but like the good kind of bad improv.
Yeah, well, it was actually the funniest part of the movie, because one of the other issues I have with this movie is that it tries to be light and fun, but is rarely funny.
I will say that it doesn't strive for straight up humor a lot, which is kind of in contention with the tone you would think it would be. It is that way earlier, like it's like fun and chipper, like, oh, I'm going to push a kid into a giant teddy bear.
Like, people have called this movie corny, cheesy. I don't disagree with those, but I also don't find them to be negatives. I would call it silly and goofy. And again, I don't necessarily think those things are negatives. But I feel like for a movie as silly and as goofy as this, I think, is aspiring to be, it should have been way fucking funnier.
Yeah, I won't discount that. I think there could have been more humor, but it wasn't. I wasn't finding myself being like, man, where's the jokes? Because there are jokes. Like as Maxwell Lord has basically gone on a wish spree of like, what he's basically doing is he'll grab anyone he can and be like, hey, what do you want to wish for? So I can suddenly like get something I need right now. Like if it's just traffic getting out of the way.
Yeah. I mean, there are some interesting things, that happen there in terms of humorous beats, but very quickly Maxwell Lord's wishes things turn political. Like he goes to Egypt and he's talking to some sort of political leader in Egypt, and this guy's an asshole.
And it's a fictional. I mean, they fictionalize the country, which is something I really like about DC, is that they will just make up fictional countries.
Right. There are alternative histories and things like that. But, this guy wishes, he's like, well, there's this ethnic group that I, clearly have a bias against. I don't want them to be able to access this portion of the land ever. And so magically a wall is built to keep them out. Click, like that. The only trouble is there are further political ramifications, and this is where the movie struggles with some tone, because the wall is suddenly there magically. Then, the members of this one ethnic group that this guy was clearly, racist against, they don't have access to fresh water anymore. And so we start to feel the human stakes a little bit. And I wish the movie had kind of stopped at that point, because as it scales up, the human stakes feel less and less tangible to me. Because eventually it gets to the point where Pedro Pascal's character, Maxwell Lord, goes to the White House and is like, Mr. President, what do you wish for? And of course, Mr. President is like, I want 100 more nukes all aimed at Russia.
Well, I will argue again for the thematics is what he actually says. He's like, what do you wish for? And the president says, what is there to wish for but more? Mm-hmm. Like, and he says that, and then he goes, more missiles so that, and more of them that were closer to them so that we could send them off. And then all of a sudden, hundreds of nukes just magically appear and are armed across the world. And it's like, whoa, okay, stuff's getting Whoa! Like,
Right.
and granted, it's this
the unintended consequence of that is that Russia immediately notices this and are like, "Oh, well, we declare war."
Yes, their early detection system sees it. And so the movie is, I mean, granted, I think this is another reason it put itself in the 80s is because playing with that tone of excess was also about the tone of excess towards our nuclear armament. And being like, yes, we were, and I think the issue that you find is that when the movie decides to bring in these enormous, darker stakes, that you feel that the tone is clashing with that intention.
Right. I think it starts to mishandle that kind of stuff because shortly thereafter, there's an action scene at the White House that kind of reminded me a little bit of the opening of X2, X-Men United.
It's not that chaotic. I know because the setting, and that is a great action sequence in X2, but direction wise, and this is intentional, the one with Nightcrawler in the White House, it's so much more deliberately chaotic.
Agreed. I think the White House action sequence in this movie is pretty fucking good, actually.
It's really good.
I've seen some people describe the effects and the fight choreography and the action as incomprehensible. I don't know what the fuck they were talking about. I understood everything that was going on. It's simple.
I think it's one of the best, most functional elements of the movie. There's a big car chase in Egypt after this magic wall gets put up, and I think Jenkins or whoever directed that, whatever, second unit,
I'm sure it was fucking prevised 2 years before they started production.
But I think the geography and the kineticism of that sequence, it's never incomprehensible. Like, it flows so well to me to the point where there is a natural build of events in the action scene where a CG truck gets flipped over and Diana gets to have her big superhero pose in the sky. I was like, yeah, this built to this very naturally in the writing and in the cinematography.
Yeah, and this was still when I was very much on board with the movie. I was like, this is an okay action sequence. It's kind of doing its nod to Fury Road, and it's not doing it as well as Fury Road did it, but it's still doing a damn good job. And the score swelled, and the Hans Zimmer Wonder Woman theme played as she was soaring through the air, and I'm like, this is working. This is good.
And she got to save kids that are in the street, which again, I like. I'm a sucker for that shit.
We see her get hurt, which is important. I think it's important to know that our superheroes are vulnerable, and not just invincible machines of violence.
Yes.
I think to see her get hurt and to actually bleed is important to see in that scene. It's important to see her fail at things. She slips from her lasso because she's gradually getting weaker. Turns out the stone is gradually robbing her of her Amazonian powers the more Steve Trevor sticks around. So eventually, we know that Steve Trevor's not going to be around forever. We also know that because we've seen movies further on down the timeline and Steve Trevor just ain't there and she's still pining for him. And the movie is building this up to be an important beat for her, big emotional beat that should play as tragedy. It really should play as tragedy. Well,
we should set it up because they eventually find out because they have to have the cornball scene where they go to the expert who has the big book.
Yeah.
And they realize that the only way to stop this is either to destroy the stone, which is off the table now because Max has become the stone, or everybody has to renounce their wishes. And Diana ends up having to be the first one to do that, which means that Steve has to go away.
Right. I mean, I figured at this point, this movie could go in a couple of ways. Like they could throw Maxwell Lord into a wood chipper, which, a lot of comic book movies would do. They could go have a fight with a god, which is what the previous movie did.
Woof.
But I'm glad they do neither of those things. I'm actually glad that they decided to do something a little bit more ambitious because it delivers on an emotional beat of Diana convincing the world to renounce all of their wishes. Now, this is so emotionally ambitious that I think it would probably take a few more rewrites to get this correct, but it also is incredibly performance dependent. And it's one of the things that I don't think Gal Gadot was really able to do was sell it. It really broke my heart to see the movie falter at this enormously sincere beat. And it just felt off. I mean, but it wasn't nearly as off as her goodbye from Steve Trevor. Like that for me was where the movie soured so quickly.
And it's so because like earlier in the movie when they're flying, Diana has this conversation with him where she says, flight is always the thing that's been you to me. Like I associate you with flight and I've never been able to fly. And he tells her, like, it's easy. You just have to know how to catch the wind and air and everything. And so in this moment, after they've had a big showdown at the White House and Steve is, saying his goodbyes, like, you got to let me go. You got to renounce your wish. The world needs you. And she's going to run away and have her big emotional moment. And it involves her swinging into the sky and figuring out how to fly. And she hears the voiceover again from Steve. Like, that moment, it hit me. And this is like the specific divergent point, I think, for you and me. Like, this was like, I was in tears.
Well, it actually started a little bit earlier for me.
Okay.
There's a scene between, after Barbara and Wonder Woman fight in one of the rooms at the White House, and it's a pretty well staged fight, I thought. Wonder Woman is, obviously her powers are diminished, so she's got her ass kicked and she's, leaning against the wall. She's on the floor. And she and Barbara have a scene where they actually discuss a couple of, things that are important to their, character development, advancing our understanding of their emotional states and things like that. And I was like, the scene isn't blocked and staged correctly. There's something off about this. I don't like this. And I'm like, why is Barbara suddenly defending Max Lord so vehemently? Like, I didn't quite understand.
Well, I think that was established because Barbara is the one who finds the man with the big book. And she is there in the scene where they say, like, look, we got to take care of Max or do something to end these wishes. And Barbara is immediately like, no, because she's very much doing the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman in Batman Returns thing, where she is the glasses wearing dork that nobody takes seriously, that nobody likes, that is a total loser. She gets her wish, and her wish is to be like Diana. Like, she says, like, I want to be strong, sexy, cool. And all of a sudden she is.
She also just has a thing for Maxwell Lord. Like, it's implied that they bone early on in the movie.
Yeah. So that was set up, that she is like, no, you can't do anything to Max because they even say, when they say the monkey's paw thing, like, you get your greatest wish, but it takes away the thing that's most important to you. And Kristen Wiig responds like, what's more precious to you than your wish? And because her sacrifice, not knowing, is that she was actually a really kind, generous person. Like, we see her giving money or food to some homeless person and being a nice person. But the cost of her wish is that she has become cold and heartless.
Yes. But I still didn't quite get there with her, like, really defending Maxwell Lord in that moment, like her becoming Maxwell Lord's bodyguard. I was like, I don't think we quite earned that. And there's a whole bunch of stuff from that point forward that I don't feel like the movie is either earning or is handling correctly. There is this extraordinarily goofy, like almost kind of low rent, like TV quality scene where Steve and Diana are trudging away from the White House down the street in DC. And there's all this sort of just generalized silly chaos going on around them. There's smoke, there's fire trucks, there's policemen standing around doing stuff. There's a family huddling under a space blanket, which I just found so odd. I'm like, what is happening? What is this? Like, the Soviets just declared war. What's going on here with all this?
Well, before the Soviets declare war, stuff is just falling into chaos because there's all these protests going on and all of this fallout that's happening from the wishes Max has granted.
Right. And the chaos is all over the spectrum of chaos. So it's like really silly stuff like, Mike, there are a bunch of cows here. Oh no. To things like, oh, I'm discriminating against this ethnic group in the Middle East and now they don't have any fresh water. Yeah, it's an odd mix of tones, man. And this whole scene where Steve and Diana are just at their low point, having to plan like Steve's exit from the film, which should be a really heavy decision. And yet when they come time for that moment, it just doesn't happen well.
Well, again, I think like Gadot's performance played a big part in that for you. It didn't for me. Like, again, like I recognize what you're saying, but I was really swept up in the emotional wavelength that the movie was going for. And granted, I recognize the emotional wavelength is like Everest peak high. Like, that's what it's going for. And I think that is actually going to be a tough one to climb for a lot of people, because most of the time in these kind of superhero movies that we've gotten used to, they don't go that high.
No, they learn to solve their problems through violence, which is easy and transactional in movies.
Well, and it's not just solving the problems through violence. It's also that the stakes have become so very specifically about but is Captain America gonna like Iron Man? Like, and it's much more interpersonal, and that's not really what's going on here. Maybe that's a negative, but for me, I was so clicked in to the emotional wavelength that when that third act ramp up happened, I was on board, like I was feeling it. And so in the ending, and I wrote this in my review, this is not a movie that the ending is won by delivering the biggest punch. It's by delivering the biggest heart. The ending is a plea to compassion. And I know Patty Jenkins has said this, I'm sure it's one of her log lines in press interviews, that Wonder Woman's greatest superpower is her compassion.
Yeah.
And that's what the movie argues in the end, because in the end, Max Lord is able to televise himself to everybody in the world. And by doing that, he can say, make a wish. So everybody in the world starts wishing stuff, and he's just power mad, and, you know, the wind machines are going, and it's just so fucking over the top. And I love it.
Yeah. He's in Alfred Molina's big sun chamber from the beginning of Spider-Man 2, just like, what is going on?
He's standing in the Bram Stoker's Dracula room going, wins.
Yeah. This sequence made so little sense to me. I mean, so little sense. It was crazy, because to me, it was like he was standing in front of a camera. He was at a little lectern with the presidential seal behind him. And I was like, okay, I get this. He's on TV. And he's amassing so much magical wish power that like a bunch of papers are blowing around the room. That's silly. Okay. And then he goes and stands in the middle of this like weird energy beam chamber to do what? I don't know.
Well, because the camera, whatever thing that Diana stops it. So he's like standing into the actual like transmission beam.
Right. But what does that do? What's the goal?
Well, it's not even, it's beyond like the functionality of that at that point. It has gone so far over into pure the metaphor of everything going on. And somehow, like, because what happens is that Diana is able to lasso him with the lasso of truth, and is, you know, making her big thematic statement, and he's not hearing it. And she's like, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to them. And then we see that just this golden light is broadcasting across the world, like begging people, like, I know that you want things to be better, and you've seen things be bad, and you think that just wishing for it, using the power of positive thinking, which they name drop, which is really fun, and just wanting this thing and then getting it, that's good, but you don't understand how it's hurting the other people of the world. And like, please, like, you know, renounce your wishes and you can save the world. Like, and I don't, like, I was fucking crying at the end of that, because it was such a plea to people. Like, the heart of the movie, it's big and dumb and corny and ridiculous, but, you know, after fucking 2020, I think it was a real breaking point for me. Maybe, you know, and I don't want to discount your experience with the movie here. Well, again, but I recognize, because after a certain point for you, I don't think there was any getting back on the train.
Yeah, I was checked out. I mean, all I could see in this moment where she's giving this like earnest plea was, I was just like, Gal's not doing it. This performance, it's just not there for me. Yeah, it was the train had left the tracks at this point, you know, and it makes this thematic statement. I think that it needed to do a little bit of thematic clarification, because like the opening of the movie sets up this thing where she's competing in these like Amazonian games as a little kid, and there's a point where she gets distracted and she gets knocked off her horse, and her horse runs away, and it's like, well, fuck, she's pretty much lost. Then she figures out an alternate way, and then she comes back and completes the course, but they know she didn't do it the right way, and so they take it away from her.
And they specifically say, like, no, if you would have won, like, this would be a lie. Like, you can't win based on lies. Like, you only have the truth. There is no shorter way. And thematically, it's interesting. Obviously, they're trying to tie that into her wish to bring back Steve Trevor, and that, like, look, this is the shorter way.
And also the greater themes of, like, you can wish for success, but you didn't earn it.
Right. You didn't work for this kind of thing, that, you know, just believing, you know, taking this shorter way. I will. So there's two things I do want to acknowledge before we close up here, is that one, that I do agree with you structurally that as the third act goes into it, Diana has already had her resolution.
Yes.
She does not have anything to resolve really by the end of the movie. She is just a vocal point to try and get the rest of the world to reach its resolution. Two, and this is something this is maybe my biggest criticism of the movie, is I actually think Barbara, who later, when she's on the plane with Max Lord, says like, I want to basically amp up my wish. And she's like, I don't want to be like Diana. I want to be something new, an apex predator, which turns her into Cheetah. They have a big fight. It's fine. I will say one of my favorite parts of that fight is when we have a camera angle inside of Diana's armor and the cheetah's like scratching inside and like knocking pieces of it off. I really like that shot.
It's okay. That sequence gets a little lost in CGI because they unfortunately they do a big Voldemort nose on on Kristen Wiig's face that I didn't like. If they fucked with her face, I hate that shit.
My biggest criticism is that there is a moment in that fight where Diana says, you have to renounce your wish. And Cheetah says, never. So Diana basically does something that seems like it would kill her.
Yeah, leaves her for dead.
But she's not dead. She picks her up and she's clearly knocked out. Diana seems to recognize that. And then the next time we cut back to her, she is turned into Kristen Wiig again. I don't know if that was necessarily because Maxwell Lord ends up renouncing his wish, which negates everybody's wishes, or she ended up negating her wish. That's not even the big thing. The big thing is Barbara doesn't have a good conclusion.
No, it's unfortunate. The theme oddly ties into more criticisms, and we've gone on a little long about this, but we can tighten it up. It suddenly introducing things without having quite established them or earned that, like it's very, very sudden that Diana reveals that she has the power to turn things invisible. Out of nowhere. And I was like, this is the equivalent of like Superman flying the wrong direction around the world to reverse time. It's just a silly thing that the movie introduces in the moment to get across, its affected desire.
I was going to have a much more dismissive thing. I was like, this is like when Superman throws his insignia in
Superman 2. Yeah.
And it's just like, okay.
What was that? That's silly. I mean, they get the invisible jet, but I was like, what? Okay.
She's I mean, the explanation that she has is like, well, look, my father used magic to make Themyscira invisible, and I've been trying to figure out how he did it. And it's like, okay, like, sure, we could have seen like a scene of her doing, like, she explains that she's like, I did it with a coffee cup and lost it. It's like, okay, we could have like seen that scene earlier, but whatever, like that's part of that kind of like superhero ridiculousness that is
sure
whatever for me.
It's just not the kind of like superhero ridiculous we see a lot of right now in contemporary superhero movies. That's fine. It's fine that it's different, but I do feel like the movie didn't quite put the stepping stones to get there. There's also like that moment where she abandons her love of Steve Trevor and renounces her wish and says, okay, I have to let you go. And then she discovers for the first time that she has the power of flight, and she actually strikes the classic Superman pose while flying. And I was like, well, I feel like this is a borrowed moment that it hasn't quite earned. It's pure void space of her just against a green screen with like a very like dead in the face performance. And the music cue that they use isn't even like a Hans Zimmer cue with a theme that they've composed specifically for the movie. It's a music cue from an entirely different fucking movie, from the movie Sunshine, the Danny Boyle movie. And they've used that music cue in a bunch of shit. And I'll talk about it later. But anyway, I was like, what? No, what is this?
Well, I mean, I'm bummed because it definitely feels like the third act or at least the transitionary period from the second to the third act, it totally turned like the switch off for you, and anything after that,
table, man, boom.
It was done. There was nothing it could do after that point. At least what it did. I felt very differently, and maybe that I think is going to end up being one of the divisive elements of this movie. And I mean, it already has. Like I said, there's been a narrative that like there's not enough action, and I'm like, that's dumb. Like,
I don't care about that. That's fine.
Yeah, but like it's like, yeah, if she was punching people every 20 minutes, the movie would totally be magically fixed. It's like, I really like the characters. I like that this movie has slipped into the Wonder Woman that it feels like it always wanted to be, like tonally and everything.
There's a more comfortable feel to this, and I will say, like, if they had attempted to quote unquote fix this movie with a bunch of reshoots and a different director and brought on 6 editors to this movie to hack it to pieces, to cut down anything and turn it into like Hellboy 2019 or whatever year that that last Hellboy movie came out, where they just took all the air out of it and took all the character work out of it to make sure it was the most stimulating and it was always doing something so you didn't get bored. Like, I'm glad we didn't get that version of this movie. I'm glad we got the version that's maybe a little too long and a little too sappy and a little too silly. Like, I'm glad we got that version. It feels more true.
I mean, we've said this before. Check this on the bingo card. This movie feels like a director's cut.
Yeah.
Like, it really feels like there is a vision and a place and a statement in mind with this, and that it is wrestling with really big ideas. It is not just like, but will Iron Man like Captain America? Will they beat the Purple Man?
Yeah, it does indeed feel like a Patty Jenkins film, for better or worse.
Sure.
It feels like a Patty Jenkins film and not just another, and it just not just another entry in a huge ongoing mega franchise.
Yeah, and I would always rather that risk be rewarded than do something that is very easily repeatable and safe. And you know, whether that works or not, we'll have to see. I'll be very interested to see what kind of the general consensus is, because of the way this is being released and because of the time it's being released, we can't just go off of like, but it made X $100 million, so it must be good. Like,
right. Yeah, we can't really rely on that narrative the whole time. But like, as far as whether I recommend this movie, I recommend the first 2/3 of this movie pretty heartily. Like, yeah, it's pretty good 2/3 of a movie. The last third, however, for me right now is a fucking mess that I hesitate to recommend to anybody.
I heartily recommend it. This is one of my favorite movies of the year. I like this more than Birds of Prey for DC stuff.
Wow, really?
Which is, I think, kind of controversial in our circle.
Yeah, Birds of Prey ranks way higher for me this year.
Yeah, so I mean, I was watching a second watch of it before we started recording. Funny enough, I had like 30 minutes like left in the third act, so I didn't get to rewatch that part. But I was still, it's like, yeah, I got to the flight scene and I'm like, fuck, I love this. Like, it's really working for me. So yeah, I'll be interested to see. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, loyal listeners. So go to GenreVision.com and comment and let us know what you think. But now we have to head over to the shelf, where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we encourage you to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks, and we will feature them in the next episode. So Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Wonder Woman 1984?
Like I said earlier, Wonder Woman 84 borrows a music cue from John Murphy and Underworld that they composed for the movie Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle. So that's the movie I'm pulling off the shelf. Similar to Wonder Woman 84, it's the third act of Sunshine that throws everybody for a loop.
You like that movie a lot, though.
I do. I really do. I think it's a little over-directed and a little over-stylized in some parts. But
I was not crazy about it. It wasn't bad, but yeah, I was not crazy about it.
I saw it in the theaters and liked it, and it's kind of grown on me. It's also an Alex Garland thing, and I admittedly have a bit of a, what for him.
Yeah, he is a big nip provider for Travis.
Yes, I like the particular stank that he puts off.
Yeah, he could put some stank out, and you would be like, the delicious rose petals.
Give me more. Yeah. That's me and Alex Garland's work. Except for The Beach. The Beach is just weird.
Never seen it.
The novel. He wrote the novel too.
Nah.
So, yeah, Sunshine, another big change late in the movie that throws a lot of people for a loop. I like it. It's the kind of change that made me sit up and go, oh, all right, this is kind of where I wanted it to go.
I like when movies can do that, but not that one.
It's kind of like me and wanting a secret werewolf movie. I keep wanting a movie where in the third act somebody is revealed to be a werewolf all along, and I keep not getting it. One of these days I'll probably just have to make that movie. We'll see.
Gotta write it. I was going to say another good example of that would be The Guest.
Sure.
The Guest has a big third act where it's like, nope, you thought we were going to be subtle. Like, this is just, we're going big. Like, they're in a Halloween maze.
Sure. But the Sunshine thing feels like a left turn for me. And it was a harsh enough left turn that I felt like felt like analogous to what I experienced with Wonder Woman 84. I was like, just after a certain point, I was like checked out. Like, no, nothing can save this. Anyway, what are you pulling off the shelf?
Well, I mentioned the Raimi Spider-Man movies in my review, and I still stick strongly by that assessment. And I'm going with Spider-Man 2, not necessarily for a qualitative comparison. Spider-Man 2 is a better movie. Don't get me wrong.
No
Spider-Man
question.
Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest, if not the greatest superhero movie ever made. But Spider-Man 2 and Wonder Woman 84 have a lot in common. Both characters end up losing their powers as a thematic statement tied into the movie. I think both of them really capture that particular kind of. They capture something about the mythos of superheroes that really speaks to me when you really go big with these characters. And it's also a movie I would love to go back and watch Spider-Man 2 and be an absolute analytical asshole and note exactly how much action is in the movie, because like my feeling going back is like, I don't think it's as action heavy as people remember it being. Like there's a lot of character stuff in that, which is what I liked about Wonder Woman 84.
Well, you know what my favorite sequence in Spider-Man 2 is?
Him eating that hot dog?
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, it's that whole shit when he doesn't have his powers and he's like, I just get to be Peter Parker.
I'm Spider-Man no more. That fucking sequence rocks.
When he eats a hot dog. And then there's that great freeze frame of him smiling.
Nothing's worrying me.
That freeze frame is so brilliant. It's so cheeseball. But no, I found a lot of similar thematical stuff. And again, just the more focus on character than necessarily feeling obligated to big action superhero beat stuff. And hey, any excuse to watch Spider-Man 2, which I might do.
What a simple movie, simple plot. Simple, simple. Beautiful.
But let's head over to the shelf for last week's pick, which was Santa Claus the Movie. Had a bunch of them, so let's rattle them off. We got Mega Man Juno went with Santa Claus Conquers the Martians and It's a Wonderful Life. Eric Fuchs had Santa Claus from 1959, the Mexican film. Very fun film. Mr. Milksteak had Green Lantern, Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, Rare Exports, a Christmas Story, and a Bourbon Barrel Aged Stout. Tasty. And JT went with Elf. And finally, Cthulhu Bob had Scrooged. A lot of good Christmas picks in there. Thank you, everybody, for your shelf picks. And looking forward to the ones for this one. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I just want to mention something really, really quick. I don't think this is something that a whole lot of people will watch, but it's fun. And it's, like this movie today, a little open-hearted and corny. And that is the Beastie Boys story. It is available to watch on Apple TV+.
Oh, yeah.
It is a live stage show that was directed by Spike Jonze that has the two remaining Beastie Boys telling their story in a way that was very much like an Apple keynote, where they're up on a stage and they have a huge projector screen behind them and they're going through a slideshow and they're narrating what it was like to go through their career.
That's what turned me off about it. Like I saw a review of it and I've seen stuff and I'm like, man, that's a weird setup.
It's a strange format. And I got to say, like the first 30 minutes, I was kind of wrestling with the format because not only are you having to deal with the fact that it's like this stage show that is, scripted and they're reading off teleprompters and Mike D is not the greatest guy to read off a teleprompter. I love Mike D. It's not an insult. He just doesn't read off a teleprompter as well as Adam Horovitz does. But not only are you dealing with the fact that it's a live stage show, but you're also dealing with the fact that they've turned it into a filmed version of that. So it's also cinema. So you're dealing with sort of like multiple levels of artifice. And for the first half hour or so, I really wrestled with that. And I was like, this is corny. I don't really like this format. But by the end of it, I was sobbing. I was alone in my apartment doing the dishes, watching this on my fucking iPhone of all things.
Oh, man. David Lynch just like cried
on your fucking
somewhere.
phone.
Yeah.
My new, And so, they're talking about the eventual death of MCA. And I'm just like weeping over my dishes. So I think the thing finally manages to land what it's aiming for, but it takes a while to do it. So I would recommend it if you have Apple TV Plus, which nobody does.
Well, let me ask you one thing about it. Do you think it will be effective to somebody who does not have any vested interest or knowledge about the Beastie Boys? No. So it is very specifically. That's part of the reason that like I know the Beastie Boys and I'm familiar with their work and I like them, but I'm not like,
I would describe my level of knowledge about the Beastie Boys to be about the same as what you just described. So,
okay. I mean, just the format of it looked weird, and I'm just more about like what, just like make a documentary, like make a documentary.
It is a weird format, but they are able to do some interesting things with that format. And when they do branch out and do some interesting things with it, it's really fun. After the credits, they actually show some of the bits that they did for the live show that they actually deleted from the filmed version. And it's really interesting. Some of the stuff they did, they actually brought in, because the show ran for multiple nights. There's a portion of the show where one night they brought in David Cross to do something. One night they brought in Steve Buscemi, and I forget who else they brought in for that? They brought in Michael Williams, The Wire's Michael Williams, to do a cameo in the show live on stage to act a role. It didn't make the final cut of the full movie, but it shows up after the credits. So recommended, but again, I'm talking to nobody because nobody has Apple TV Plus.
Right. All the people who watched Greyhound.
You might want to think about getting it though, because it has Wolfwalkers on there. Wolfwalkers fucking kicks ass.
Yeah. I think we're gonna talk about that in our extended currently consuming for our Patreon people. Well, on my end, real quick, I watched Coming to America for the very first time, which I also know you watched.
Yeah, I watched it for the very first time as well, and it's finally available in a really gorgeous 4K HDR format. I'd slept on this for a little too long. It's real damn good. Maybe a little over long, but real damn good.
It surprised the hell out of me, particularly in the first act. I was shocked at how amazing a production it is. Like, it's a capital M movie.
Oh yeah.
I figured it's like, okay, Eddie Murphy's going to walk around and do a shtick and it'll be funny because it's Eddie Murphy at the peak of his powers. But I was not prepared for it being a movie, like
a big effects film.
Yeah, a big production movie. I didn't know that it was really his first flirtation with doing multiple characters on screen and makeups. I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
So that was a surprise.
Well, I mean, it's like a Black Narcissus level movie when it comes to matte paintings. I mean, the matte paintings in the movie are insane. They actually have scenes in the first act that are interiors, and the interiors are so big that they're actually matte paintings. It's crazy.
It's incredible. It's a really jaw-dropping piece of production on that front. It's very funny. I still think it's still a comedy from the 80s, and I don't know, there's something about that decade with a lot of comedies that just never totally clicks with me.
Awesome cast though.
Fantastic cast. Oh my God. Man. Like our Eddie Murphy, of course, is great. Arsenio Hall is wonderful.
On fire. Actually, yeah, he plays some of my favorite characters in the movie.
He got some of the biggest laughs from me.
Yeah, the preacher, the minister that he plays, great. He actually has the best single reaction shot in the movie, where he opens up a door to see a character he's not expecting and screams, and it's so fucking funny.
There's a spit take he does that I'm like, I pray that was real. Like,
I know exactly which one you're talking about, and I'm sure it's not real.
No, but he plays it so well.
Yeah.
Like, and there's another moment of that scene where he's playing a different character in drag, and I swear Eddie Murphy is corpsing for a little bit.
Oh yeah, well, it'd be impossible not to laugh with these two, like in their makeups and get-ups, and that montage of them meeting weird women in that bar is so funny.
It's incredible. It had me in stitches. I was laughing so hard.
I worship the devil.
just the woman lighting the lighter under her hand, just staring them.
In my past life, I was Joan of Arc.
So good. No, I mean, I was very, very pleased to finally check that off the list. The new sequel's coming out, and I'm sure I'm gonna have to watch it for work. And
trailer looks fun.
Yeah, no, it looks like it's gonna be fun. We'll see. It's definitely, like a lot of stuff, just counting on the things that people want from the original back again. And it's like, okay. But Wesley Snipes is going to be in it, and I'm so looking forward to that. You haven't seen Dolomite Is My Name yet, have you?
Not yet, but I will.
Oh my gosh, please watch that. I want to watch that again. That movie's so good.
Craig Brewer directing, who directed Black Snake Moan.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think he directed Dolomite Is My Name as well. God, the movie's so good. Dolomite Is My Name. So Coming to America. So glad I finally got to watch that. So let's wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And actually, I cannot believe the number of comments we got for Santa Claus the movie. Y'all came out. I'm so happy. It's always the ones that surprise me. And we actually had a lot of good comments. It was tough picking one, but I loved Eric Johnson's comment, who said, "Except for Spaceballs, has there ever been a The Movie that was something other than the movie?"
Street Fighter the movie,
right? Eric Fuchs mentioned that there, or no, I don't know if it was. Guess it was Eric Fuchs who said it's like there is Street Fighter the movie, which was a game, so it's Street Fighter the movie, the game, which led us on to a wonderful, which actually I should say Eric Johnson had shelf picks, and he said that as far as with the movie, he went with Hot Dog the movie and Hamburger the movie, which amazingly are not related.
Okay.
Which I believe both of those are kind of those I think they're post Meatballs movies. So they were like, let's just have weird sex comedies or something with food.
Also unrelated, Kentucky Fried Movie.
That Kentucky Fried Movie. I offered up an IMDb link to Fart the Movie, an infamous film.
Yeah. I mean, the movies are common enough to warrant jokes like Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie film for theaters, movie film for theaters.
Yes.
Borat
subsequent movie film.
But also the first Borat had a film for make benefit of Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan or whatever it is.
Yeah. Cultural learnings for make benefit.
Yes.
The Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan. And
that's the one.
And Mr. Milkshake posted one of my favorite Mr. Show sketches, which is about Coupon the movie.
I watched that. Yeah, it's very funny.
It's very fun.
Very well directed too.
Oh man, Mr. Show's awesome. Like I love Mr. Show. My favorite bit from that when they're interviewing people who went and saw the movie, and one of them's like Jack Black, and I can't remember the other actress. It's like, we saw it, and he's like, yeah, it was a movie.
Yeah. Jack Black looking like an absolute baby.
Such
a baby. So next week, we didn't take a break for Christmas, which we normally do. The only reason we did a Christmas, December 25th recording episode for this is because Wonder Woman 1984 came out, and that was a momentous event. So next week, we're taking the week off.
However,
we have had some questions from people whether or not we're going to do sort of a year-end wrap-up episode like we normally do. No, 2020 is not worth memorializing, and movies were just weird this year. If you want to go to our Letterboxd accounts, you can look at the kind of movies that we liked this year.
You know what? I don't think we'll do a top 15 episode, but when we do our extended currently consuming, we'll just run through them. Like, not necessarily, I don't even know if I made it to 15 or not, but I have like notable movies. So if you want to know that, we're not going to focus on them. I will literally just like, these were the ones.
Yeah, we'll list them off on Patreon.
Yeah, so if you're interested in that, you can go check out patreon.com/GenreVision. We'll do it on there. But we will be taking a break next week. However, we do have a theme month for January that was spurred on by a movie we did this month, Santa Claus the movie.
We so enjoyed John Lithgow's performance in Santa Claus the movie that we started to think about other crazy Lithgow performances. And
some that we haven't seen.
Yeah. Next month, obviously excluding the first week, is a theme month that we're calling Lithgowing, Lithgone.
We will be looking at John Lithgow movies. And in fact, if you would like to comment with some suggestions, I mean, we have a couple movies. We haven't finalized the list yet, I don't think.
No.
We do have some ones we're definitely doing.
Obviously, you can go to the schedule at GenreVision.com and view which episodes we're going to be putting out throughout the month, and that will be coming very, very soon.
Yep.
But we're excited about it because that Lithgow performance in Santa Claus was the high point.
No question. So we're looking forward to discovering some more wonderful John Lithgow performances, and we hope you'll be back with us in 2021. We want to say thank you to everybody who has been a loyal listener through the year. It has been the worst year on record as far as I can remember for everyone, and the fact that you spent even a little bit of time of it with us warms our hearts. Thank you so much for listening.
2020 blew chunks, but you know what? The podcast did well this year.
Yep.
And it's because of you.
Yep, it's all y'all. You're doing that. You're making that possible, and you're making that magic. So we want to thank you for making 2020 actually really, really good as far as our podcast is concerned. And we're glad that the podcast has grown and that we have been able to be some kind of respite during this absolute dog shit of a year. So thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next year
on GenreVision.